The coffee had gone cold by the time I noticed the voicemail. I'd been out in the backyard that morning, pulling weeds along the fence line the way I do every Saturday when the weather cooperates. Portland in late September is unpredictable. 1 hour of sun, then clouds rolling in from the coast, but that morning had been clear and cool, the kind of air that makes you feel like your lungs are actually working. I was 67 years old and I still got down on my knees in the dirt without complaining. I want you to remember that. The voicemail was from my son. "Hey, Dad, it's Derek. Listen, Claire and I were thinking it's been a while. We'd love to have you over for dinner Sunday. Nothing fancy, just family." A pause. "Call me back." I stood in the kitchen holding the phone, listening to it twice. Derek and I hadn't spoken in 4 months. Not since the argument at Easter, when he'd brought up for the 3rd time in 2 years the idea of me moving into something more manageable. A condo, a retirement community, somewhere smaller, he said. Somewhere with people around in case something happens. I was 67. I ran 3 miles every Tuesday and Thursday. I managed my own investment accounts, paid my own bills, drove myself to every doctor's appointment. My wife, Margaret, had passed 6 years ago, and yes, this house was big for one person, 4 bedrooms, a yard that took 2 hours to mow, a basement full of her things I still hadn't sorted through. But it was my house. We'd bought it together in 1989 for $112,000. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I called Derek back. "Dad, great. Sunday, 7 o'clock. Claire's making her roast chicken. Sounds good," I said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself." That should have been the first sign. Derek always asked me to bring wine. He'd been particular about wine since his early 30s, the kind of particular that comes from wanting people to know you've developed taste. But this time, just yourself. I filed it away without quite examining it. Sunday came with rain. I drove the 20 minutes to their house in Beaverton with the wipers going and a bottle of Pinot Noir on the passenger seat anyway, because I wasn't about to show up empty-handed regardless of what he'd said. Derek and Claire lived in a neighborhood of large, newer homes with 3-car garages and nearly identical landscaping. Nice enough. Margaret would have found it sterile. I always thought of that when I turned onto their street. Claire answered the door. She was dressed better than a casual family dinner required: silk blouse, earrings, and her smile arrived a half-second too late, the way smiles do when someone has been rehearsing their expression in the mirror. "James, come in, come in. Let me take that." She lifted the wine from my hands before I'd fully crossed the threshold. Derek's in the living room. The house smelled like roasting chicken and something else underneath it, something floral and artificial, the kind of candle scent that means someone spent the afternoon preparing for a guest. My son was standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, wearing a collared shirt he'd clearly ironed, not pressed by a dry cleaner, ironed himself, with one small triangular crease near the second button he'd missed. "Dad." He crossed the room and hugged me with his free arm. The hug was firm, rehearsed, I thought, but then I told myself to stop being suspicious of my own son hugging me. "You look good," I said, because he did, physically. He was 41, still had most of his hair, kept himself in decent shape. "So do you. Seriously, Dad, you look great." We sat. Claire brought out glasses of sparkling water with lemon and a small bowl of mixed nuts, the expensive kind that come in a tin. Derek asked about my garden, about a neighbor's dog that had been barking, about a fishing trip I'd taken with my friend Walter back in July. He remembered details I'd mentioned in passing months ago. He was attentive in a way that felt like effort. I drank my water and answered his questions and waited. Dinner was at the long dining room table they only used for guests. Candles lit. Good china. Claire had made the roast chicken with roasted vegetables and a green salad with walnuts and cranberries. It was all very deliberate. Everything about the evening was deliberate. Derek poured the wine, my Pinot Noir, which he thanked me for bringing as though he'd forgotten he told me not to, and raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To family," Claire echoed. I raised my glass. "To family." The chicken was excellent. We talked about their daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who was 8 and apparently now obsessed with horses. Claire showed me a video on her phone of Lily at a lesson, bouncing cautiously around a ring on a patient brown mare. The girl was grinning so hard it looked like it might hurt. I watched the video twice and meant it both times. It was during the second glass of wine that Derek set down his fork. "Dad, there's actually something we wanted to talk to you about." There it was. I put down my own fork. Not dramatically. I just set it on the edge of my plate and gave him my full attention, the way his mother used to when she meant business. "We've been thinking," Derek said, "and we want you to know this comes from a place of love." He glanced at Claire, who nodded with the solemn encouragement of someone who has practiced this exchange. "The house is a lot for one person to manage, especially going into winter. The roof's going to need work eventually, you've said that yourself. And the neighborhood is fine. It's changing, Dad. You said yourself the Hendersons moved out, and the new people next door are a perfectly nice young couple with a baby." He paused, recalibrated. "What we're thinking is, and just hear us out, what if you sold the house while the market is still strong, and use that equity to set yourself up somewhere that actually serves where you are in life right now? There are some really beautiful communities, not nursing homes, active living communities. Lily could visit on weekends." "Derek." I said his name quietly. He stopped. "How long have you been planning this dinner?" "A beat." "What do you mean?" "The ironed shirt, the good china, Claire's earrings." I looked at my daughter-in-law, who had the grace to look at her plate. "You've been planning what you were going to say to me tonight, so I'm asking how long." Derek's jaw tightened slightly. "We've been concerned for a while." "Concerned about what, exactly?" "My health? I had a physical in August. Excellent numbers across the board, my doctor's words. My memory? I can tell you the name of every teacher I had from kindergarten through 12th grade if you'd like. My ability to manage my affairs? I picked my fork back up and cut a piece of chicken. What is the actual concern, son?" He leaned forward. "The house, Dad. That's the concern. That property is worth almost $800,000 and it's just sitting there. It's not sitting. I live in it. And if something happens to you, the estate process is going to be complicated, and we just think it makes more sense to simplify things now while you're in a position to make those decisions clearly." I heard that sentence the way you hear a door closing in a quiet house, very distinctly. "And where would the proceeds go?" I asked. "If I sold," Derek glanced at Claire again, "into a trust, something structured so that Lily is taken care of, and you have what you need for wherever you land, and it's all protected." "A trust managed by whom?" "We'd work with an attorney." "Managed by whom?" "Derek." He straightened. "Claire and I would be co-trustees, for practicality, so that if decisions need to be made quickly." I set down my fork again. "You want me to sell the house your mother and I bought together, put the money into a trust, and hand control of that trust to you and your wife?" "It's not handing control, it's responsible planning." "It's a Sunday night in September," I said, "and you ironed your shirt for this." Nobody spoke. The candles flickered from the air conditioning vent above the table. Claire cleared her throat softly. "James, we really do just want what's best." "I know you do," I said, and I meant it, at least partly. I believe my son genuinely wanted something that he had convinced himself was good for me. That's the particular cruelty of this kind of conversation. It arrives, wrapped in love, and some of the love is real, and that makes it harder to address directly. "I'd like some more of that chicken, if there is any." Claire blinked. Yes, of course." She went to the kitchen. Derek and I sat across from each other with the candles between us. "I'm not senile," I said quietly. "I'm not fragile. I am not going to sell that house. Dad, I'd like to enjoy the rest of dinner. We can talk again another time if you want to talk, but not like this." He nodded, slowly, and picked up his wine glass. Something moved across his face that I couldn't quite read. Frustration. Something else underneath it. I filed that away too. The drive home was quiet except for the rain. I turned on the radio to a late-night jazz station Margaret had always liked and drove through the wet streets thinking about the way my son had looked at the table when I'd asked who would manage the trust. Not embarrassed. Prepared. Like a man who had anticipated the question and had his answer ready and was mildly annoyed the question had come sooner than expected. That was on a Sunday. On Wednesday, my bank called. The woman on the phone was from the fraud department, calm and professional, and she asked me to verify some recent activity on my home equity line of credit. I told her I hadn't touched that account in years. She told me that an inquiry had been made the previous Friday, 3 days before my Sunday dinner, to access the full available balance. I sat down. The inquiry had included documentation, a letter, supposedly from me, stating that I intended to liquidate the equity line to consolidate funds in preparation for a property sale. The letter had my signature on it. I had not written that letter. I had not signed it. I had not spoken to anyone at that bank in at least 2 years. The inquiry was flagged, the woman told me, because the documentation was submitted by fax from a number we don't have on file for your account, and there were some inconsistencies in the formatting. She paused. Mr. Calloway, we do need to ask, are you aware of anyone who might have access to your account information? I stared at the wall of my kitchen. Outside the window, a crow was sitting on the fence post, just sitting there. Can you tell me, I said carefully, what fax number was used? She gave it to me. I wrote it down on the notepad I keep by the phone. The notepad Margaret bought at a gift shop in Cannon Beach the summer before she got sick. It has a lighthouse on the cover. I thanked the woman, confirmed that the inquiry was not authorized by me, and asked her to flag the account and require in-person verification for any future requests. She told me she'd already initiated that process and would be sending written confirmation. She was very thorough. I appreciated it. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The fax number was not familiar to me. I didn't know anyone who still used a fax machine regularly. But I wrote it down, and then I called my friend Walter, who spent 30 years as a civil litigation attorney before he retired. We've been fishing together since our kids were in Little League. He's the kind of man who answers the phone on the second ring. Walter, I said, I need you to help me look something up. It took him about 4 minutes. The fax number was registered to a UPS store in Beaverton. Not Derek's home, not his office. A UPS store in a strip mall 11 minutes from his house. I looked at the crow on the fence. It tilted its head and looked back. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage. I know people expect rage in a story like this, and maybe rage would have been simpler. What I felt was something closer to grief, a deep, tired sadness that moved through me slowly, the way cold water does. My son had sat across from me at a candlelit table 3 days after attempting to forge my signature on a bank document, and he had told me he was concerned about my welfare. I thought about Margaret, about the night we'd signed the papers on that house, standing in a realtor's office in October with a pen that kept skipping, laughing every time it skipped. About Derek at 7 years old, running through the backyard with the sprinklers on, shrieking the way children do when they are purely physically happy. About all the years between that boy and this one. Then I dried my eyes, blew my nose, and called Walter back. I need a favor, I said, and I need you to be available Saturday. Walter, to his eternal credit, simply said, "What time?" I called Derek on Thursday. Friendly, neutral, the way I'd been trained by 40 years of professional life to sound when I needed to be strategic. I told him I'd been thinking about what he'd said at dinner, that I wasn't closed to a conversation, that maybe we could sit down again, this time at my house, on Saturday afternoon, just the two of us, without the china and the candles, more casual. I said I might be open to hearing more about how a trust like that would actually work. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Yeah, Dad, I think that's really mature. I'm glad you're thinking about this. Mature. I wrote that down on the lighthouse notepad too. Saturday came in clear and cool again, proper autumn weather. I spent the morning putting fresh coffee on and arranging the living room the way Margaret used to for important conversations, nothing fussy, just orderly, the kind of space that communicates that the person who lives here is in full command of their surrounding. Every book on the shelves in its place. No clutter on the coffee table. The good chairs pulled out. Walter arrived at 1. He was wearing his regular weekend clothes, flannel shirt, khakis because I'd asked him to come informally. He sat in the armchair by the window with his coffee and his legal notepad and looked at me over his reading glasses. "You sure about this?" he said. "I'm sure, because once you open this door, I know what I'm doing, Walter." He nodded and settled back. He'd known me long enough to know when I'd made up my mind. Derek arrived at 2. He knocked even though he knows I don't lock the front door during the day. I noticed that the knock, the formality of it, as though he'd been thinking about how to present himself. He came in and stopped when he saw Walter in the armchair. "Oh, I didn't know anyone else was going to be here." "Walter's an old friend," I said. "He joined us for coffee." "Sit down, Derek." My son sat on the couch across from me. He was casual today, jeans, a sweater, and I could see him recalibrating, deciding how to play it with a witness present. He gave Walter a polite smile, and Walter gave him one back, and then Walter turned to look out the window and was very quiet, the way good attorneys know how to be quiet. "You said you'd been thinking about the trust idea," Derek said. "I have been," I said. "I've been thinking about a lot of things this week, actually." I reached to the side table and picked up the notepad. I'd written several things on it. On Wednesday, I got a call from my bank. Derek's expression didn't change. That was the thing. It simply didn't change. A person who hears that their parent got an unexpected call from a bank should register something: curiosity, concern, a question forming. My son's face stayed exactly where it was. "They flagged an unauthorized inquiry on my home equity line," I said. "Someone had submitted documentation attempting to access the full balance." The documentation included a letter with my signature on it. I looked at him. "A letter I didn't write." Silence. "The inquiry was sent from a fax machine," I continued, "at a UPS store in Beaverton, 11 minutes from your house, last Friday, 3 days before you invited me to dinner." The room was very still. Outside, a car passed on the street. Walter didn't move. Derek opened his mouth, closed it. Then, "Dad, I can explain. I'm going to ask you one question," I said, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. Not because the answer changes what's already happened, but because the answer will change what happens next. Did you send that document?" He looked at me for a long time. His throat moved, and then something broke open in his face. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy and just had it taken from him. "I panicked," he said. "The market is good right now, and I wanted to protect the asset. Before I lost my mind." My voice was even. "Before I made a bad decision. Before I gave it to someone else. Before it got complicated," he said. "Estate stuff gets complicated, Dad. I've seen it happen to other families, and I wanted it handled. So you forged my signature on a bank document." He flinched at the word forged. I didn't think of it like that. "Walter," I said, "would you like to explain to my son what that is, legally?" Walter turned from the window. He looked at Derek with the calm, measured attention of a man who has spent decades in courtrooms. "What you've described," he said pleasantly, "is bank fraud, felony level. In Oregon, if the intent was to access funds, the institution has the document. Your father has the fax records. That's a meaningful amount of evidence." Derek had gone pale. "I'm not going to the police," I said, and I watched some of the color come back into my son's face. "That's not what I want. You are my son, and I loved your mother and she loved you, and I will not be the reason you have a criminal record. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it completely." I leaned forward. I am 67 years old. I am in full possession of my faculties. I have an excellent attorney, Walter, here, who I am formally retaining as of this week, and I have already had my will reviewed and updated. The house is mine. The equity is mine. And if any document surfaces at any institution bearing my name on anything I did not personally sign in person with identification present, I will have no choice but to let the bank handle it the way banks handle fraud. Derek sat very still. What I would like, I said, is for you to go home and tell Claire that this conversation happened. I would like you to think about the fact that your daughter is 8 years old and she adores you, and the man she adores is someone who is capable of forging his father's signature. And I would like you to come back to me not with a plan, not with a proposal, just to talk, like a father and a son, without an agenda. He didn't speak for a long time. The afternoon light came through the window behind Walter and fell across the coffee table, across the coasters Margaret picked up at a farmer's market, across the room that still held the shape of her attention in every arrangement of every object in it. "I'm sorry," Derek said finally. His voice had gone rough. "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know what I was thinking. I think you were scared," I said. "I think watching people get older scares you, and I think somewhere underneath all of this, you are still the kid who couldn't stand the idea of anything happening to his parents and couldn't figure out what to do with that feeling. I understand that. I'm not indifferent to it." I paused. "But fear doesn't entitle you to what belongs to someone else, not even to someone you love." He nodded. His eyes were wet. Walter stood up, set his coffee cup down gently, and excused himself to wait on the back porch with the tact of a man who has witnessed enough private moments to know when to give people space. Derek and I sat across from each other in the quiet house. "Mom would be so disappointed in me," he said. "Your mother," I said carefully, "believed that people could be better than their worst moments. She based that belief on evidence she gathered over a lifetime. I think she'd want you to be better than this one." I stood up and he stood up, and I did something I hadn't planned to do. I put my arms around my son. He was stiff for a moment, and then he wasn't. "Go home," I said. "Hug your daughter. Call me next week. Not about the house. Just to talk." He left without the Pinot Noir. I hadn't offered it. Walter came back in from the porch and poured himself more coffee and sat back down in the armchair by the window. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the way old friends do. "That was well handled," he said eventually. "Margaret would have done it better. Margaret would have done it differently," he said. "You did it your way. It was good." I looked around the living room, the books on their shelves, the coasters from the farmer's market, the framed photograph on the side table of the two of us at the Oregon coast in 2003, squinting into the wind, both of us laughing at something neither of us could probably remember now, but captured in the image as pure and careless happiness. I was 67 years old. I knew every creak in the floorboards of this house. I had planted the roses along the back fence, and I intended to see them bloom again in May, and the May after that, and however many Mays I was given after those. The house was not a problem to be managed. It was the place where my life had happened. It was the place where it was still happening. I got up and went to water the plant on the kitchen windowsill that Margaret had given me a cutting of, years ago, that I had somehow managed not to kill. It needed water. I gave it water. Outside, the afternoon was golden and clear, the kind of September light that doesn't last long but is beautiful precisely because it doesn't. Some things, I thought, you simply have to tend to yourself.